it settled this issue. And Christianity was dominant for more than 1,000 years. The idea of Christianity. And they utilized Plato and Aristotle and all these guys. And I think it's because of its ability to be able to utilize these worldviews and make sense of it that it survived that long, over 1,000 years. But Christianity would have its crisis during the Reformation. During the Reformation, there's this struggle happening from inside the church. They were able to put down any sort of issues that were happening outside of the church, like the rise of Islam and some of these other ideas, radical ideas that were coming from the East. They were able to defend their ideas, but when Christians themselves decide to question Christianity, and then from the inside there's this fracture. Martin Luther, who nailed the 95 Thesis, as we discussed in the Reformation, on the door of the church, challenging the church in 1517, caused a lot of wars, right? Throughout Europe, there's a lot of wars. And the last great war was the 30 Years' War, where everybody said, well, the church can't even get their act together. I mean, nobody has all the answers. We're done with everybody trying to come up with all the answers. No one has the answers. And so then Descartes comes, and that's where we started our journey a few Sabbaths ago. Excuse me. Descartes comes along, and Descartes says, we need to start again. We need to start from scratch. We need to wipe away everything we think we know about anything. As a matter of fact, he says, he puts it this way: let me just get a basket full of apples, and he's going to take things out of that basket that's not apples. In other words, he's going to begin from doubt. I'm going to doubt that this is what it is. And from doubt, he begins to doubt everything. He says, I doubt what I'm seeing, I doubt what I'm experiencing, I'm doubting all these things, until he came to the logical conclusion that he can't doubt what he's doubting. And he says, well, if I know I'm doubting something, then I must exist. And so he came up with the idea of cognito ergo sum, which is this idea that if everything else is not real, one thing I know is real is that I'm thinking. And so he begins from intuition, he begins from the rationalism. And so Descartes launches this rationalist movement where you have Descartes and Leibniz and Spinoza. We have been looking at Descartes, Leibniz, and Spinoza. These guys who were trying to rebuild truth. And what they did was, by rebuilding truth, is that they were at the same time poking at the idea of God. And probably nobody does that better than Spinoza, who was excommunicated by the church, and then he was excommunicated by the Jews. I don't even know if the Jews actually have a system of excommunication, but that's how bad this guy was, that the Jews are like, we don't even want to borrow this guy. He no longer believed in the idea of God as we know it in the Bible. We are now getting at that stage where the idea of deism is about to come. Atheism is knocking at the door. These guys are providing the basis for deism and atheism to come in. While they're trying to solve the puzzle of what's truth, we're leaning towards, if there is a God, it's not the God of the Bible. And if it's not that guy, it's nobody. And so we have these rationalists now that come out of France, that area, Belgium, Amsterdam, and then the English say, well, we're not going to let this go without a fight. And John Locke is one of those guys that came along and says, well, Descartes got it wrong. It's not in the mind, it's in the experiences, it's in empiricism. And keep in mind that the scientific revolution is happening around this time as well. And mind you, those of you who don't know who John Locke is an inspiration to the founding fathers of this nation, like Thomas Jefferson loved John Locke. They say that without John Locke, you don't have the founding fathers. This is the guy that helped justify the idea of a revolution. Now, it's not a revolution in terms of rebelling against the government. It was a revolution of going back to what it means to be human. And John Locke is one of these guys who helped to bring back what Descartes took away, which Descartes almost took away everything. And John Locke is trying to save us from that chaos. And John Locke says, listen, when we see something, we see matter, and when we see matter, we engage with matter, and we have to divide what we're experiencing here. There's the first and the second categories of these experiences, and so he tries to divide this experience, and he begins to build his foundation on experience again. And so Locke built the foundation that all knowledge begins with what? It begins with experience. But his followers, like George Berkeley, who would come later, George Berkeley took that logic to the extreme conclusion. What does Berkeley say? He says, if all we know is what we perceive, then maybe the world only exists when we perceive it. Now, we're going to go into Berkeley now and Hume. And I really need to finish Berkeley and Hume because this is going to set the foundation for us going into the 19th century and into where we are today. So, Locke's realism gave way to Berkeley's idealism, and the slope towards skepticism is about to begin. Remember, philosophical impasse is created when two great ideas. At the moment, everyone thinks Descartes' ideas, rationalistic ideas, have solved the problems. John Locke comes in and says, nope, it's experience. You can't throw away experience. And now we're about to have another heavyweight by the name of George Berkeley, and then we're going to look at David Hume. So, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to dive right into George Berkeley. You may see that his name looks like Berkeley, but if you've studied Berkeley before, you'd know that his name is pronounced Berkeley. And so George Berkeley, 1685 to 1753, these are the years that he was alive. I'm going to call him the philosopher of perception. So he's born in Ireland around 1685, educated at Trinity College in Dublin. And he's an Anglican bishop. He's a theologian and a philosopher, a gentle soul, deeply devoted to God. Now, he has a pastoral heart, this man, Berkeley. He's a brilliant thinker who admired Locke, but believed that Locke hadn't gone far enough in analyzing what it means to perceive something. When you see something, what does that mean that you can actually perceive something? And so he's going to really rattle you today. Am I really here teaching this class? Yeah, are you really seeing this? How are you perceiving what you're perceiving right now? How are you actually hearing what you're hearing right now? So he says he's known for his politeness and humility and charity, a thinker with pastoral warmth. He spent part of his life trying to establish a mission field during the age of discovery. In Bermuda, he was trying to run an evangelistic school there. He tried to open up a mission field there, where he tried to educate through the scriptures the Native Americans and also the African slaves that were in Bermuda at the time. It didn't actually happen. He tried his best during that time, and so he's one of those guys that got around to seeing America during the age of discovery. So Berkeley isn't just a philosopher in a textbook. He's a sincere Christian and one who wanted to defend God's reality against the creeping materialism of his time. And so what is Berkeley known for? Well, Berkeley is known for completely transforming Locke's ideas or his philosophy with one explosive idea, which is esse est percepti. It's the opposite of I think, therefore I am, cognito ergo sum. He says, no, to be or to exist is to be perceived. In other words, Gerald, you're only here because I perceive you. But if I don't perceive you, how do we justify that you're actually sitting where you are, experiencing what you're experiencing? Because I have to try and justify your existence. And so if Descartes says, I think, therefore you exist, Berkeley says, no, you exist primarily because I see you. And so we'll unpack that a little bit. So his argument was that all we ever experience are ideas in our minds. That's all. He also said we never experience matter directly, only our perceptions of it. And so therefore we call like physical objects are simply collections of perceptions sustained by this perceiving mind. Right? So everything around us exists because our minds perceive it. And number 4, he says, if no one is looking at the tree, does it exist? Right? Berkeley says yes. Why? Because ultimately God perceives it. So you're sitting here going, I don't know if what I'm actually perceiving right now actually exists. Oh, I better not go to sleep, because if I go to sleep, then I'm not perceiving anything, then I'm going to disappear. And then he goes, oh, but wait, Gerald is perceiving me. So as long as Gerald is perceiving me, then I exist. But then Gerald has to go to sleep sometime, and then like, oh my goodness. And then he says, oh, but God doesn't sleep. And God perceives everything. And because God doesn't sleep, he perceives everything. Berkeley is ultimately going to land in this idea that everything is held together because of who? God. He's going to say that everything exists because of God. So this idea is called idealism. Excuse me. This is called idealism, the belief that reality is fundamentally mental or spiritual. It's not physical. So he's challenging this atheistic, materialistic idea that's creeping in. He can see where Descartes and Spinoza's ideas are going to lead us. And Berkeley is going to rescue the situation by trying to balance out these ideas and challenge these ideas. And so in Berkeley's day, this new world was about to take over. This new world of materialism, atheism, and the belief of that they only believe that physical matter is the only thing that's real. And so materialists, they argued that everything is made of particles. The soul is just brain chemistry. Some of these ideas are still in psychology today. God is unnecessary to explain the universe. That's ultimately where you're going to go with this materialism. If something can't be measured physically, then it's not real. This terrified Berkeley, not because he feared science, but because he saw where the ideas of Locke was going to lead us. So, some say that Locke was accidentally opening the door to atheism. Others say he was actually atheist because the church was still dominant at the time. He didn't really come out. We don't know. I'm going to lean towards the idea that he did believe in God. He was just trying to make sense of it. So I say that the door was left accidentally open. What do I mean by that? Locke said all our knowledge of truth comes from our sensory experience, right? That was not meant to be an attack on Christianity. He's trying to deal with Descartes' idea that nothing exists except his mind. So Locke was a Christian who wanted faith to be logical, to be rational, but Berkeley saw the danger. If you say everything you know comes through your 5 senses, and then say your senses comes from the material world, where does that ultimately land you? Well, a future atheist will naturally say, then all reality is material, which in fact is what actually happened. And then if all reality is material, then God is unnecessary. God is unnecessary. And so Berkeley realized this, and so materialists would use Locke's philosophy as a stepping stone to deny God. the ground is being set up for Darwin and Dawkins to later on come and say, hey, we're just going to microwave a little bit of Locke's ideas here and help us to understand the material world as we know it. And so Berkeley's strategy was to attack materialism at its roots. And how do you attack materialism at its roots? Berkeley's going to break it down for us. He says, instead of fighting materialism by appealing to emotions or tradition, Berkeley went after its foundational assumptions. So materialists assume that matter exists independently of perception. You notice where he's going now with this whole idea of perception. Berkeley asked, how do you know that? How do you know that matter actually exists? If you never perceive matter itself, you know, only your perception of it exists. But how do you know beyond your perception that it's actually real? So he saw a philosophical opening and he ran for it. He saw that opening. He says, actually, we don't actually perceive matter. We don't perceive ideas or experience it. You know, we perceive ideas or experience in our minds. He says, if that is true, then materialist's entire claim is going to actually collapse. So Berkeley, he argues, if you only ever experience perception, then matter becomes unnecessary, not God. Okay, so this was actually a devastating attack on materialism from the inside, you know, from their own system. And so Berkeley's big move was God is the sustainer of what we perceive because he perceives all things, so that we need God in order to understand what we're looking at. In other words, we're dependent on God for what we see. So one of the guys that first talked about this was Augustine. Think about the eyes, guys. Think about your eyes. Brilliant, right? Like brilliant creations, our ability to see. Augustine says, as great as our eyes may be, it's dependent on light. Once someone takes the light out, you're even if you can see well, you're dependent on something that's external for it to actually work. In the same way, Augustine says, our minds, our knowledge, as sharp as it may be, without God, like you can't make sense of the world. We've got this idea coming back with Berkeley, who says you may be seeing matter and putting your dependency on matter. And he says that matter doesn't actually exist, it's only your perception of matter. So then you need God to help you make sense of what you're perceiving. That's the road that Berkeley's taking us down on, because he's arguing that we experience ideas in our minds. Remember, he's trying to rescue God. These ideas need a cause. The only adequate cause is mind. Our minds can't sustain the entire universe, therefore, the universe must be sustained by another mind, a greater mind, a mind that is not limited. It's an unlimited mind. He's a necessary God, right? This is God's mind. So instead of saying matter causes perception, what does Berkeley say? Berkeley says God causes perception. And so this changes everything. And so just when people were heading towards atheism through Locke, Berkeley comes along and says, nope, go that way. They're like, all right. So Bach's ideas sound, convincing at this stage. And so Berkeley's genius flips the script, okay? And so this idea of like the materialist version is that matter, your experience with matter produces what our minds know. And so it produces optionally the idea that God exists because we're trying to make sense of it. Meaning, first there's matter. Then the mind evolves from matter. then the idea of God is something the mind makes up. This leads naturally to atheism. So how does Berkeley flip the script? He flips the script by saying, no, we begin with God, right? God produces what we see and understand in our minds. We know because God allows us to know. God gives us this special understanding, this revelation. And then from our minds, then we perceive reality. So now I know I'm looking at Gerald because God enlightens me. God has helped me to make sense of this. So what does this mean? It means that first there is God. He creates the mind, which is the soul, the consciousness of a person. Then the experience we call reality are given to us by God. So this leads naturally to Christianity, right? So why this was revolutionary? It was revolutionary because Berkeley did something that no empiricist or rationalist have ever done before. He kept science's focus still on experience. That's why he's an empiricist, right? It's crazy, empiricism and idealism together. Berkeley does it. But he made God the explanation of that experience. So he dismantled materialism using empiricism, which is it's no small feat what this guy has done. He turned perception itself into evidence for God. He turned daily experience into divine communication and divine connection with God. So it was one of the most creative and powerful defenses of Christianity during this period. People who were questioning Christianity said, but Berkeley says this. It's like, that's a great argument. And so a simple way that we can explain it is like this. You've never seen matter. You've never touched matter. You've only ever experienced perceptions, colors, sounds, sensations in your mind. If that's true, what sustains the world when you aren't looking at it? Berkeley answered, God is what sustains the world when you're not looking at it. Reality itself is evidence of the God who holds everything together. So, in one sentence, what is Berkeley saying? Berkeley challenged the materialism because he believed the physical world cannot explain itself. So, only God can explain the world. So his religious views, Berkeley was passionate deeply. He was an Orthodox Christian. He believed that God is the ultimate perceiver. He believed that God sustains all existence moment by moment. Reality itself is evidence of God's ongoing presence. And then because of this, he says miracles are possible. He says miracles are possible because nature is not a machine. It's not mechanical. He says nature is dependent on God. And if nature is dependent on God, who says God can't create miracles in the natural world if God is in control? It is God's constant activity. It's part of who he is. So his entire philosophy was designed to protect the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, the possibility of revelation, and also the meaningfulness of spiritual reality. So in Berkeley's system, God becomes the foundation of the world, and it's not matter. So how did this impact philosophy? Berkeley is often misunderstood or dismissed, but his impact is like enormous. Excuse me. He says he launched idealism, one of the most important movements in modern philosophy. He strengthened spiritual interpretations of reality, but he also challenged atheism and materialism long before Darwin and Dawkins came onto the scene. We're about to talk about Darwin real soon and how that became the dominant idea. What eventually becomes the dominant idea. He forced philosophers to take the act of perception seriously. And then finally, his impact was that he emphasized the active presence of God in the world. So Berkeley reminds the world the things we see are not more real than the God who enables us to see. So why is he important to apologetics? He's important to apologetics in three ways. The first reason that he's important to apologetics is Berkeley is a powerful apologetic because he refutes materialism. He gives us the tools by which we can refute materialism. He shows that matter is not self-explanatory. Physical reality does not rest on itself. It rests on the sustaining mind of God. Number two is that he shows the reality requires an ultimate perceiver, which is this necessary God. So nothing in the world exists independently. So your perceptions come from God ultimately, and the world persists because God thinks it into being. It's because God sustains it. So this destroys atheistic ideas of a cold, self-running universe. And then finally, did you want to? Okay. And number three, he recenters God as the foundation of all knowledge. He says, as you're trying to remove God from the center, you may have done this accidentally. I'm bringing him back to the center. And Berkeley says, empiricists after Locke, we're slowly drifting towards skepticism, naturalism, agnosticism, and eventually atheism. And so Berkeley slammed his staff into the ground and said, no philosophy will stand if God is not at the center of it. He's a great guy, isn't he? This guy is just trying to do his best to wrestle with these philosophical minds using philosophy as well, using empiricism to argue against this rationalist and empiricist ideas that were happening. So here's one of the few philosophers who used empiricism to defend Christianity instead of dismantling it. And so what are the biblical connections? The biblical connections is that Berkeley's theology echoes scripture. In Acts 17:28, when Paul was in Athens, he's quoting, by the way, another Athenian poet. He says, in him we live and move and have our being. In other words, it's God that sustains us. Colossians 1:17, he says he is before how many things? All things. He's before all things. And in him, all things are what? Held together. So Berkeley's arguing that the Bible, the God of the Bible, is the God that holds all things together. That once we remove God from the center, we're in danger. And so Berkeley is wanting to rescue us from that. So what's an apologetic skill that we can take from Berkeley? When people would say, we live in a physical world. If I can't touch it, then I won't believe it. Berkeley's response would be, you don't actually experience matter. You're experiencing perception. And perception requires a mind. And the entire structure of reality is held together by the ultimate mind, which is God. So his argument or his response would be, everything you believe exists. Colors, shapes, sounds. It's actually your mind interpreting those signals. They've actually proven that in science, that there are actually no colors. It's just different variations of light that causes it. Yep.
Well, and right now they have the psychologists and whatever have a therapy.
Yes.
And one of our acquaintances, their son just went through this 2 weekends ago.
Oh, really? Interesting.
They give them all kinds of psychedelic drugs and
right.
Just trying to blow their mind.
Wow.
And get a mental reset.
Wow. Yep.
So,
Yeah. It's exactly what Berkeley's, talking about. He's saying that you never really touch matter directly. He says that means the world is far more spiritual than atheists would like to admit. He says Berkeley argued that reality itself points to God's ongoing presence in the world. Without a divine mind, nothing could exist at all. And so his argument disarms materialism and shifts the conversation towards the necessary conversation about God. Yes?
Some would argue that all of that just arises from chemical reactions.
Yes. And that's what the argument is about, because that's where Descartes takes us. That's where Platonic ideas, no, it's the opposite. That's where Hume is going to come in with that argument. They're just chemicals. There's no longer a soul. Yeah.
All this perception, that's just matter reacting.
Yep. And so that's why he's reacting to that idea, because Locke opens the door to that idea. But Hume's going to come in and put a nail in the box with exactly what you just mentioned. And so before we jump into Hume, let's summarize what Berkeley did for us. So you have his idea, to be is to be perceived. So the description, or what that means, is we only ever experience ideas in our minds. We never really experience matter directly. And so the apologetic lesson here is that it shows that physical world is not self-sufficient. Reality requires a perceiver. So he's pointing to God as the foundation of existence. His second idea is that God as the sustainer of the mind. What does that mean? It means that the world continues to exist because God is always perceiving it. How does that help us apologetically? It affirms God's eminence and active involvement in creation. It's against this deistic idea. So it refutes deism and atheistic materialism. His third idea is no independent matter, which means matter does not exist as self-standing substance. Only minds and ideas truly exist. How does that help us apologetically? It helps apologists show that materialism fails. Reality is more spiritual than secular thinkers would like to admit. Number 4 is perception reveals God. It actually proves God. Our sensations are signs caused and sustained by God, who communicates through the order of perception. So how does that help us apologetically? Everyday experience becomes evidence of God's presence. So creation becomes a form of divine revelation. And then finally, he says it's spirit over matter. The mind, which is spirit, is primarily matter, is primary, and matter is secondary and depends on God. And so what does that mean for us? It strengthens the defense of the soul, the consciousness, and the spiritual dimension of reality. Yep.
At this point, did they have like the laws of thermodynamics or any of that kind of stuff? Because the third law, entropy,
Yep.
certainly support all of his ideas that God needs to hold it all together. Otherwise, it falls apart.
The idea of entropy was already around because Aristotle had already established the laws of entropy, the laws of logic. And so these ideas, are around.